Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Spill the Compost Tea, a curated conversation on Greenway Conservancy organic practices. I am going to jump right in because we have a lot to go over today. My name is Keelin Caldwell. I'm the Director of Programs and Community Engagement for the Greenway Conservancy. We have over 200 people registered for today's webinar, and we're super excited to spill our truths about the organic horticulture practices that have been used on the Greenway since we opened 11 years ago, including a special behind the scenes look at our compost tea program. As we all know, COVID-19 has changed almost every aspect of our lives, but we are excited about this virtual opportunity since it can be hard to give a tour of our compost tea operations or the different parts of our organic program. So this will help us get really up and close on those parts of our work. This presentation will be recorded and available afterwards. And we'd love to get a quick sense of who is joining today. So you will see a poll pop up on your screen, and please just take a moment when that pops up to choose the main reason that you're joining us today. And then since we have attendees from far and wide, I'm going to briefly orient you to the Rose Kennedy Greenway. The Greenway is a 1.5 mile public park running between Chinatown and the North End, right in downtown Boston. And the reason the park is linear and right downtown is that what used to be here is an elevated highway, which you can see in this picture. And as part of the Big Dig project in Boston, a tunnel was built underground for this highway. And here's the after picture that's showing the new green space. That is the Greenway. So the Greenway opened in 2008 as that Big Dig project was wrapping up, and it sits on top of the I-93 tunnel. And so although downtown is currently pretty subdued, the Greenway is typically full of activity. We have over 400 free events every year in a normal year, a custom carousel. We had the first food truck in Boston, the first beer garden, lush garden spaces, contemporary public art, water features. So it's an amazing place. You should visit our website and learn more. And then I work for the Greenway Conservancy, which is the nonprofit responsible for the management and care of the Greenway. This model is a little unusual in Massachusetts, so I'll just point out that the Mass Department of Transportation owns the land that the Greenway is on and then leases it to our nonprofit, and we have total operating control. So we have a full horticulture and maintenance staff in addition to programs, art, development, admin. And overall, we envision a vibrant and inclusive and evolving gathering place that raises the standard of excellence for public parks. So with that background, I want to introduce our format and our speakers today. We'll start off with a presentation that goes over our approach to organic maintenance, and then we'll share a never before seen video that highlights our compost tea brewing and application process. As the moderator, I'll then ask the panelists some follow-up questions, and we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. If you submitted a question ahead of time, thank you. If you would like to submit a question anytime during the presentation, we'd love to hear from you, and you can use the Q&A function within Zoom webinar on the bottom. So we are joined today by Anthony Ruggiero, who's our Superintendent of Horticulture. Anthony has been with the Conservancy since almost the beginning, joining in 2009. He now oversees the Greenway's horticulture team, which has around 5 full-time staff and around 5 seasonal and intern staff. He holds an associate's degree in turfgraft management from Stockbridge University and a bachelor's degree in plant and soil science from UMass Amherst. Prior to joining the Conservancy, Anthony worked in a variety of green industry jobs, sort of always focused on sustainable and organic land care. You're going to see in the video that our star is Tori Heine, who's our ecological healthcare horticulturalist. Tori has a BS in environmental horticulture and landscape design from the University of Maine and joined the Conservancy in 2014. She helps sustain ecological and plant health and soil biology throughout the Greenway and focuses on everything you're going to hear about today. And then we're also joined by superstar volunteer Kathy Weston. After a business career and a lifetime of more traditional gardening, Kathy has embarked on a journey to become a garden ecologist and native plant landscape designer. She has a certificate in native plant horticulture and design from the Native Plant Trust, and she also has a blog, goldenrodgarden.com, about using native plants in her Cape Cod garden. And she's been volunteering on the Greenway for a number of years. She's also a trustee of the Chatham Conservation Foundation and serves on the board of Friends of Sylvan Gardens in Chatham. And I'll say briefly about myself that I've been with the Conservancy for 7 years in a variety of roles. So I'm focused now on programming and outreach, but my background is in horticulture with a degree in plant science. So I'm very excited to get back to my roots today and dive into this topic. And with those intros, I'm going to pass it off to Anthony to give an overview of the what, why, and how of our organic program.
Excellent. Thank you, Keelin. I think we can go to the next slide, Alan. So yeah, thank you, Keelin, and thank you to everyone attending. This is something I'm really excited about doing this webinar today, as it's something that I'm personally very passionate about. And it's one of the big reasons that drew me to the Conservancy 11 years ago today. And here I am as the Superintendent of Horticulture in charge of the Horticulture Department. And so when we talk about organics, what does it mean to us and, here at the Greenway? We're guided by the Northeast Organic Farming Association's Organic Land Care Standards, or NOFA's AOLCPs. Well, we're all accredited organic land care professionals, which they have organic standards to abide by. We don't use any synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, or pesticides. We focused on a ground-up approach, focusing on robust soil management. We could go to the next. And so why do we manage the park organically? Well, as Keelin mentioned prior, the Greenway was created as part of the Big Dig. And right around that same time, the Boston Harbor was undergoing a massive cleanup effort. With this clean slate and, downtown Boston, it was actually mandated that the Greenway be maintained organically from the start. And, that was a pretty unusual decision at the time. And it's an amazing opportunity to maintain a healthy landscape for the people and all that enjoy the park here in Boston. The Conservancy, we're here, we're committed to using the best organic practices to manage the Greenway, creating a healthy and welcoming ecosystem that's sustainable for people, pets, and the environment. And in doing so, we create a landscape and a park that children and pets can play freely and safely on our lawns. Runoff from the parks won't pollute Boston Harbor or harm the delicate marine life there and the marine ecosystem there. Our plants are healthier and more resilient and better able to withstand the wear and tear of public use. And the Greenway is more economical to maintain in the long run. And what does that mean? So in 2011, we worked with a group of students from the Harvard Kennedy School graduate program, and they did a study comparing our organic land care practices to a more traditional approach and compared the costs associated with each. And in doing so, they found out that in the long run, organics is cheaper, perhaps with some, maybe some more upfront costs associated with building the system up. So one of the things using a more traditional approach, a lot of those products are petroleum based. The cost of petroleum varies widely, tends to go up over time, as well as those products are salt based and quick available forms of nutrients. So when you're using salt, you're killing that biology that has those interactions to create plants and to make plants thrive better. So how do we do it? Here at the Greenway and in organics in general, we're looking at the big picture. We're looking at the whole of everything, not just each of its parts separately. Everything's connected and each of its pieces are important and related to one another to function properly and to thrive. This is from soil biology monitoring and management, to fertilizing and amendment application, to mowing properly and irrigating properly. It's all important for a successful outcome. And we're focusing on long-term performance rather than short-term gains. So what's our philosophy here? From the very beginning when I started and was tasked with creating an organic program here, the basis of my philosophy was to create a healthy, functioning ecosystem that's unique to our downtown urban environment and our urban park environment. In doing so, we're able to create a system that mimics what Mother Nature does naturally. These are systems that happen naturally throughout the planet, and this is how plants thrive naturally. So trying to mimic those systems that she has created. And one of the basis of what we do here, it all begins with soil management. And one of the big things I'm looking at is the soil food web and the interaction of these organisms or the biology. And when I'm talking about organisms and soil biology, I'm talking about the fungi, the bacteria, the nematodes, the protozoa, the arthropods and the macroarthropods that make up this system in the soil. We focused on this robust soil management and focused on creating a healthy soil food web, a functioning soil food web, a goal of raising our organic matter to 6% and keeping a thriving soil biology. I'll be talking about some of these specific pieces in a moment here, so I'll follow up more with those as we move along. One of the bases of everything we do and all of our decisions that are made in our organic program, they all start with soil tests. We do soil tests every single fall. We do all of our lawns in each parcel. We do our beds, like beds in each parcel. So we do a chemical analysis through UMass Amherst where we do all of that stuff. And then we do a smattering of soil food web tests, which look at the biological activity and the functioning of our biological system. But all of our decisions are based off of the previous fall's results. We analyze them over the winter time. We look at trends from year to year to year, and that's what we base all of our decisions off of. So, you know, what is a healthy soil? Well, a healthy, normal soil is full of biology. Per gram of soil, there are 600 million bacteria, 15,000 to 20,000 bacterial species, 150 to 300 meters of fungal biomass, 5,000 to 10,000 fungal species, 20,000 protozoa, 20 to 30 beneficial nematodes, and then in a square yard of soil, it could contain as many as 500 to 200,000 individual arthropods. I mean, that's an astounding amount of life in a small amount of soil, and that life in the soil is integral to keeping plants alive. They've formed naturally in symbiosis throughout millions and millions of years. Actually, if there's one other little thing I wanted to mention, if we could go back a slide. So as we're talking about this biology in, you know, using traditional fertilizers, as I said before, they're salt-based. And when putting down those traditional fertilizers, that salt actually degrades the organisms, and we end up having, it just ends up creating a sterile kind of growing medium. So that's another reason when doing things synthetically, you need to put more and more inputs down because you don't have nature working for you to help provide those things. So you end up needing to put more and more inputs down. Kind of, I think about it as the salting the earth approach that warring countries used to do back in the day. They'd salt their fields to prevent them from having agriculture and food sources and stuff. So that's kind of what I think about using, you know, in my organic approach. It kills off the biology of the soil. Thank you, Al. We can move to the next one. So, and looking at the soil food web a little bit closer in the components of it, we'll start with bacteria. Well, bacteria are a decomposer, which means they have a huge role in breaking down nutrients and making them available again in the soil food web. Without these decomposers, nothing really starts moving. Many of other organisms eat these bacteria and move those nutrients along. Most of the bacteria populations are found right in the rhizosphere, which is the area immediately adjacent to the root system of plants, and they rely on root exudates and organic matter as food sources. Bacteria also play a vital role in binding soil particles together, which improve the flow of water and the ability of soil to hold water and improve soil structure. We can go, the next group of organisms we'll talk about are protozoa. There are several types of protozoa, flagellates, amoebas, and ciliates, and they primarily feed on bacteria. And as they eat these bacteria, that have converted these forms of nutrients in the soil that aren't available to plants, and as the bacteria eats that, they convert them to plant available forms. When the protozoa eat the bacteria, they don't need all of those nutrients, so they release the extra nutrients that they don't need to live, and as a result, providing plant available forms of nutrients to the plants in the soil. This is called the nitrogen cycling or nutrient cycling capacity of the soil. Because protozoa rely on bacteria as a food source and need water to move in, they are found mostly in the rhizosphere, again, along that, right up in the area adjacent to the root system. Each part of the food web needs the other parts to be successful, and protozoa make sure bacterial populations are regulated and refreshed. They also help suppress disease by competing with or feeding on other organisms or pathogens. The next portion of the soil food we'll talk about is fungi. Fungi are another type of decomposer and are better at breaking down more complex compounds in the soil. Bacteria kind of likes the simple stuff, whereas fungi are able to break down these more complex compounds. Like bacteria, they also help soil particles bind together and build soil organic matter, which is a great thing for soil structure and water retention. As you know, water is another huge input in gardening. So creating a system that naturally is able to retain more water, you're able to put less inputs in and providing additional extra water, and your plants will be healthier for that. Another type of really important fungi are mycorrhizal fungi. These are kind of especially cool because they actually colonize or live in plant roots and help extend the reach of the root system. They have this symbiotic relationship with the plants, and they derive nutrients from carbon from the plants, and in doing so bring in nutrients that are otherwise hard for the plant to absorb and help improve plant growth. Last but not least, we have nematodes. A lot of hype is around root feeding nematodes. Those are the bad guys. They can do damage to plants, but they get the most of attention, but the majority of the nematode population perform beneficial roles in the soil, and there's far less known about them. They can be categorized into 5 different categories: bacterial feeders, root feeders, fungal feeders, predatory nematodes, and omnivores. So out of those, only one of them are bad, the root feeders. As we get further going up the food web, organisms are excreting the nutrients they have consumed from microorganisms, and again, making these nutrients in forms that are available to the plants, available to them in the soil structure. So building robust soils, what do we do here on the Greenway? On our lawn, generally in our plant beds, we don't have to do a lot. Our systems are functioning really well. So we don't necessarily add a lot or really any amendments to our beds as a rule. But again, everything's based off soil tests. So again, amendments and fertilizers are applied based on soil tests. We do apply fertilizers to our lawns and amendments because they're very high use. I almost kind of treat them more like a sports turf than a kind of passive park environment. So they do need a few more inputs than your regular backyard home lawn in order to thrive and look great. We have a comprehensive compost tea program that you're going to see in a little bit, a really cool video coming up. So really excited to see Tori shining in her glory up in our North End garage brewing compost tea. So that's a really important part. And essentially that's taking biology and trying to continue the biological growth in the soil by amending and inoculating the soil with a diverse variety of biology. And all of this is with the aim to get the right soil biology and available nutrients for the system to maintain itself rather than needing a lot of inputs from us. So our organic land care principles, as I've said multiple times throughout this, everything starts with the soil for us. We test it regularly and we feed it to ensure robust soil health, including biological activity. So when you're thinking about it, we're tending to feed the soil more, not the plants themselves, focusing on this soil system. In turn, the plants derive their nutrients from the soil and will thrive as a result. We select and install plants for diversity and wildlife habitat, focusing on matching the plant needs with the conditions that are present in the planting bed itself, rather than trying to force a plant to grow in conditions that it doesn't like to grow. You'll have to put a lot more inputs in that way. We manage our turf with proper mowing, watering, and other practices that promote resiliency needed in our high-use urban environment. We ensure plants receive adequate supplemental watering, but we do have an irrigation system. We try to rely on Mother Nature as much as possible, but as you guys know that, this year's been very, very dry, so we do have an irrigation system to keep things looking their best and thriving in the long run. And then with everything we do, we employ environmentally friendly and sustainable practice throughout the operation. We have a fleet of electric vehicles, try to minimize gas-powered equipment as much as possible. So, and with this, we wouldn't be able to do it without our amazing volunteers that we have. We have a really robust volunteer program. We've got regulars that live in the area that come out on right now it's fairly weekly, but once a month kind of program, usually in the regular season. We have corporate groups that come out. We have zone gardeners or zone volunteers that come out on a more consistent basis weekly. And it's just amazing. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without their help. And it's all about cultivating relationships. Some of these people that, that we work with, they're friends and our horticulture family. And it's just a great relationship. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. And we do have one wonderful volunteer of many here with us that Kathy Weston will be speaking in a little bit. And, they help us get all the good work done that we do, from hand pulling, planting, and all that stuff. And so what does all of this do? Well, we have beautiful, resilient plantings that are able to withstand the harsh environment. We have healthy turf, as you see here. As I said before, pre-COVID, we're a very busy park with high impact. So here we have one of many activities going on, and we have an exercise class. This is a very high intense lawn here, and it's nice and green and healthy. Wildlife habitat, how cool is this? You can see a little monarch chrysalis. I mean, from beneficial insects to pollinators. This is on a milkweed growing in the park, and it's just really cool to know that we're creating a healthy environment that these organisms are able to find a home in and can thrive. And then one last but not least, I love this picture. We have a lot of lawn baby photos, knowing that we're creating an environment in a landscape that you don't have to worry about the chemicals that may be applied to the lawn. It's safe and healthy for all. And this little fella's sitting here enjoying the lawn, and it looks like he may not be eating his lunch, but he's eating some grass, and that's okay. Our lawns are healthy, and they're all better for it. And I just want to say thank you for coming today. That's my little piece on organic land care. And this is a picture of our COVID hort staff. Several of those individuals were summer interns, so they're back to school right now. But with volunteers, we wouldn't be able to do everything we do without an amazing staff. And I'm very lucky to work with a group of very dedicated individuals. It makes my job a lot easier, and I can't speak more highly of all of them. Thanks, Keelin. And I guess with that, I'm going to pass it back to Keelin, and she's going to talk a little bit more. Thanks, all.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm looking forward to asking some follow-up questions in a few minutes. But right now, we're going to take you all behind the scenes with our compost tea brewing operation. So this video is about 8 minutes, shares the ins and outs and secrets to our successful compost tea program. As you are all probably familiar with Zoom, sometimes you experience minor temporary lags depending on your internet. So just to know that an HD version of this will be sent to registrants and made available on our website following the event. We'll also be sharing on our social media channels, so be sure to follow us and share if you enjoy. So hope you enjoy it. Here we go.
I'm ready. Greenway Conservancy. living ecosystem. For us, we have worms that greatly contribute to our program. They are red wigglers, and so they're decomposers. I need this vermicompost to put into my mixture compost. So we have the red wigglers, and they eat their weight in, vegetables and fruit. Like, as much as I can give them, sometimes it's 20 pounds that's gone in a week. I think that the most important ingredient in compost tea is oxygen. Even over the compost itself, and that might be weird, but it really is just to remember these are living things. Just like us, they definitely need oxygen. You can't just put something in a tub of water for 2 days and expect it to survive, to thrive, no chance. So oxygen is the most important thing. Okay, let me start by saying you should never drink compost tea. Actually, the first step you need to do is you need to fill up your water. It's, again, just like making regular tea. Then you put your bag of tea in. If you don't have oxygen in your compost tea, all you have is some groundwater. And then you take all of your ingredients, and this can vary depending on what your soils are into. You put in a little bit of fish hydrolysate and some humic acid. And then a little bit of flour, just to help the fungal population move into the bin. And then what? And then once you have everything in the bin, everything's bubbling, it will do that for 24 hours. And then I come back in 24 hours, take that tea, I'm going to take the compost out, I'm going to get a new bag of compost, put it in, just to reinvigorate the mixture, get some new microbes in there, and then I'm going to add some more food just so nobody feels left out, and just really try to amp it up until, day 3, technically, when it goes out to the farm. Every single step of this is about getting them more and more excited. Like this, in my head, I picture it as this party, and moving from one step to the other. You always have to keep them excited and ready to go. In a normal year, I would do this 3 times. I'd have 3 application rounds where I'd be applying to all of the beds. All of the lawns. The containers. And some of the trees, I do deep root injections to around their root mass. That's you're just shooting biology down there. The goal is sustainability. The Greenway specifically is so unique. It is this park system on top of a tunnel. There's ground moving. There's all these little elements to it. It's between 2 city streets. People are using the park. There's active sun. There's shade points. Everything is a little bit more difficult here. The goal is to help this park just be able to exist and be able to thrive without a ton of inputs. Our volunteers are incredible, especially our individual group volunteers and our zone volunteers. To me, these individuals, they contribute greatly because I think that the most important thing you do to have, a functioning ecosystem in a park setting is to be super observant and to be curious about what's going on. And these people do that every day, as much as I do. And they'll tell me what they're seeing. And they've watched the park since it started its journey. Organic, yeah. Organic is a funny word. It can mean different things to different people. Compost tea is part of the organic program. But the organic program is just one little piece, a really important piece to our overall mission of ecological health. Greenway.org, and I hope in the meantime you guys get out and come enjoy the park.
Well, I hope you got a sense from that how fun our staff are, and that you have your little personal dance moment while watching the webinar today. Just again, the Making Compost Tea video featured Tori, our ecological healthcare horticulturalist, and it was produced and edited by Alan Auger, creative services manager, and the back end person here today. So thank you, Alan and Tori, for being so passionate about your work. Tori does say hello from the field. She is hard at work applying the compost tea, which is only effective when soils are at a certain temperature. So there's a pretty small window in the fall where she needs to be applying all day, every day. So, but she is listening in. So hi from Tori. So now I want to jump into some further discussion and welcome again our great volunteer, Kathy. I'm going to ask Kathy and Anthony a few more questions to dig in a little bit more on some topics, and then we'll have more open Q&A. We've been getting some great questions in. So again, you can type any questions you have into the Q&A feature at the bottom here, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So Kathy, I'd love to welcome you again, start with you. As Tori sort of alluded to in the video, one of the side effects, I think, of being 100% organically maintained on the Greenway is that we attract really amazing horticulture staff and volunteers that are, committed to environmental health and want to be able to practice that professionally or in their free time. Can you share a little bit about your journey to becoming a Conservancy volunteer?
Sure. Thank you, Keelin, and it's an honor to be asked to participate in this. This is wonderful. As you mentioned before, when I was retiring and deciding to focus on garden ecology and native plants, I was taking classes at the Native Plant Trust, which are awesome, by the way. But their certificate program does require some community service. So I was looking around for a place to do community service. I was at a conference and I happened to meet Dara Cole, who's the senior designer working on the horticulture staff. And we were talking, I asked her about volunteer opportunities, and she said yes. Eager to reel somebody else in, I'm sure. So I signed up for a few individual opportunities. I loved the work. I loved the people I was dealing with, and I've continued to expand my role. And I now volunteer on a weekly basis in the zone program and find it just an incredibly rewarding experience. So thank you.
And I love that story because I think it is just such a direct connection to, you were interested in learning about this and ended up connected to the Greenway.
Yeah.
Anthony, to pivot to you, the Greenway is a totally public urban park. It's always on display. There's no gates. There's a million entrances. So how do you balance the sort of neat and tidy look that people might be used to from a park or a garden with the goals of a healthy ecosystem? Are they in conflict?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Keelin. I don't necessarily think they're in conflict. Us in organics, we just have a different toolbox to bring to manage the landscapes. So we try to manage the greenway like a botanical garden, keeping plants in the park both healthy and looking their best at all times. We try to keep plants well tended and within beds, but we don't we don't tend to clear everything, and all of that is about education too, educating the public and why we do these practices. It's for the bigger ecological health of the park, and in turn, creating landscapes that are more adaptable. We adopt high standards in the springtime, doing cleanups in the park with our supplemental services contractor, block by block, who does, the trash removal, keeping trash out of the beds, sidewalks clear, and all of that stuff. So it's a dynamic approach, but it's one that's not in conflict.
Yeah, and having come from the botanic garden world, I cannot tell the difference at all.
And as I said before,
Together, right?
as I said before, having a dedicated staff and a very dedicated staff and a very dedicated group of volunteers, it certainly helps that along.
Kathy, maybe going back to the certificate program that you completed, and also knowing your involvement in the Chatham area projects, what do you think we're doing on the Greenway that is especially unique, or that you enjoyed learning about when you joined us?
Well, besides all the soil focus and the compost tea, which is like totally unique, I'd go a little bit different direction on this one and tee off one of the things Anthony said earlier about the right plant, right place. One of the things that I've been intrigued about is the way the garden beds are designed. They're designed as communities of plants. So, and they're different in different sections. The North End community of plants is showier. There's native plants at the Wharf Garden. There's kind of more traditional American plants in the fort, et cetera. So those plants are that's not a random choice. I mean, those are designed to all have the same kinds of needs, water, light, soil nutrition, et cetera, so that the organic program can tailor the practices right to that community of plants. And then they're designed to look beautiful as a community. But because they're designed in layers and to fill the space and to be beautiful and balance their care and maintenance needs, it all kind of works together in a very integrated way. I mean, it's hard to balance that visual aspect with the ecological aspect of it. And I think that's what's really beautiful about what's been done there.
Great. And then Anthony, let's talk a little bit about weeds, because that's another, herbicides are often used in residential, commercial, and public landscaping to keep that weed cover down. We use no herbicides on the Greenway, and everything, looks great. So what's our secret?
Yeah, so no, that's a great question. A lot of times when people think about organics is, there's going to be weeds. You don't have a means to control them. And that's not necessarily true. We focus on regularly monitoring for weeds. We've got staff out in each of our park areas on a weekly basis, hand pulling weeds as necessary. There's a lot of hand pulling, especially in the summertime, but pulling it, from the root, getting the whole plant out. That is, in turn, these two guys are your best means of weed control, pulling them and removing the actual plant. So as I said, routine monitoring. Sometimes, we do have invasive things pop up here and there, knotweed in certain areas, but we try to get it early, repeatedly cut it back, hand pull as much as we can, and continue monitoring. We try to avoid conditions that are favored by weeds, such as, bare soil, disturbance, compaction, and ill-timed applications of things. We also do have a tolerance of weeds in certain areas. A good example of this is clover in our lawns. We allow clover to grow in our lawns. Before the 1950s, every high-end lawn had clover as part of their grass seed mix. Clover is a nitrogen-fixing plant and helps bring in atmospheric nitrogen. It provides nitrogen to the soil, so it in turn can be beneficial to the lawns to create that healthy soil environment. And we do tolerate diseases and pests. Some are bad, some insects are beneficial and that helps cause a balanced ecosystem. But we'll selectively treat things if the plant is either seriously diseased or weeds get out of control. But weeds are generally approached with a hand pull kind of method. We very rarely use any control products, even organic products, because I think in the end, hand pulling is the better approach. So as far as like disease or predators and stuff, we try to focus on natural predators and organic methods as a first approach. Like we use nematodes to control grubs in our lawn, and like I said, hand removal of weeds and utilizing insecticidal soaps if we have to, or horticultural oils. But again, we tend not to apply even any control products.
Well, yeah, and I think like you said, weeds like to take opportunities to grow, and the fewer that we can provide for them by having full lush coverage, the better.
Yep. And that's really the approach we take in our lawns, trying to create a thick, dense turf. Weeds need sunlight to germinate, and if you're getting away from that, then you're less likely to have those weeds in the first place.
Yeah. Kathy, speaking of weeding, since you've done your fair share of it for us, one of the ways that you volunteer with us is right alongside of our horticulture staff doing things like weeding. Can you talk more about the tasks that you help out with and how that sort of connects to these broader goals we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think the tasks that we do as volunteers are very similar to the tasks that any gardener would do, throughout the calendar year. But with this generally a little bit of a twist in terms of how we do them to best execute the organic program. Every spring, for instance, the program calls for adding leaf mold or compost to the garden beds. So a truck will pull up and deposit 10 yards of compost, and the volunteers are out there with wheelbarrows and pails and rakes, and we get to hand pick it up and apply it onto the garden bed. So we're getting our chance to add to the soil mix at that point. We don't get to do compost tea. We get to watch Tori do it, which is fine. In the summer, as you said, we do a lot of weed pulling, but we also are out there as kind of eyes and ears on the plants because we're in the plant beds and looking around. And whenever we see diseases, we can point it out to staff and they can decide what to do about it. Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, just cut that one out. It's too diseased and the leaves aren't contributing to the plant anymore." Others say, "Oh, that's not bad. We'll leave that and clean it up in the fall." And then in the fall, we do cutbacks, and in the winter, we do pruning, all the normal stuff. But as we're doing this, the staff is really good about explaining exactly why we're doing what we're doing at that point in time and how we're doing it. So we're learning about the organic program week by week by week as we do all of these tasks.
Great. And then maybe back to Anthony for a question on how, if you were to be asked to transition a park or a public space that had been more conventionally maintained to being more organically maintained, what would be your first step? And, can you do it without the compost tea, which obviously we just saw takes a lot of inputs?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Definitely. One of the very first things I would do is a soil test. You don't know what's going on in the soil without doing a soil test. I would at least do a chemical analysis. There are various places that do these chemical analyses. We use UMass Amherst. They're a really good soil lab, and I am an alma mater there. It's my alma mater, so I do have a, go UMass. They've got a great program there. So they've got a great soil lab, and I would say consistency with soil tests. Different organizations or different companies tend to do different types of tests. So I like to stick with UMass so I can look at trends over the years. We'll get the same results that way. Again, there's a lot of different tools in the organic toolbox, different things that you can do to help you manage your landscapes or to transition to it organically. You don't necessarily have to jump in right off the bat, but there are certain small practices you can do. Soil tests, find out what's going on. Organic fertilizers, try to get the soil working for you. Using compost if you have the ability to either purchase some compost, put that in your plant beds to help build up that organic matter. In our lawns, one of the approaches we'll take in the fall time usually, again, based on soil test, we may top dress with like a 1/4 inch of compost after we aerate in the fall time. So something like that, getting those practices done and trying to build up that soil food web to start working for you.
Great. And then last question, and then we're going to transition to Q&A because we're getting a lot of great questions. So Kathy, you have the property in Cape Cod. You're doing a long-term sort of intensive project to restore native species on that property. Can you talk more about how you've applied the concepts we talked about today in your own garden?
Sure. I had been starting to transition to organic practices somewhat before I started working with the Greenway. My vegetable garden, for instance, was the first place I went organic. But seeing how the organic practices worked on the Greenway gave me the confidence to kind of go the rest of the way. And so over the last few years, I have stopped buying fertilizer. I don't buy Roundup anymore. I do all organic practices. My lawn is a Cape Cod lawn, which has no water, no fertilizer, no pesticides, etc. I'm not trying to make compost tea, but I did start my kind of really beef up my own composting, and that's what I'm applying now into my garden beds. It's particularly in the areas that need a richer soil. Some of my garden beds don't need that kind of soil. I'm growing Cape Cod native plants that like sand, But I think I really have a much deeper appreciation of what a robust ecology looks like in a garden bed. And I've come to see that gardens are way more beautiful when they're not just visual things, but when they're full of life. So that's my goal now in my own gardens, is to create gardens and landscapes that are full of life.
Awesome. And from our poll, it looks like we're almost 60% home gardeners today. So I am going to focus a little bit on that in the Q&A, but we have a lot of amazing questions. You feel free to still submit. If we don't get to your question, you can definitely email us at info@rosekennedygreenway.org. But I'm going to jump right in. And what we got from multiple people that I would love Anthony to talk about is, can you make compost tea at home? Especially without all the equipment that everyone just saw in that video, and if you don't, kind of how do you get that same effect?
Yeah, no, that's another excellent question. So yes, you can make compost tea at home. You need to have an understanding of soil biology, and you want to know that the compost you're getting is good compost. When we get compost in, we do ask for a soil test from our compost manufacturers, both a chemical analysis again and a soil food web, because if that stuff is not in the compost to begin with, you're not going to be bringing it into the tea. So you'll just be, like Tori said, making brown water. Not going to hurt anything necessarily, but you're not, it's not benefiting from it. So yeah, one of the things I appreciate about what we're doing here in the Greenway in our compost tea program is that it's kind of elegant in its simplicity, where we've got 4 50-gallon homebrew brewers that myself, Tori, have built using, I think, 1-inch or 3/4-inch PVC from Home Depot that we purchased. We have aquarium grade pumps. Those are the most expensive aspect of it. For what we do here, you want to make sure that the pump you're using is putting enough oxygen into the soil. I think it's like 600 parts per million of oxygen in the solution to keep that biology alive. So that's a really important aspect. But yeah, you can do it on a small scale. You can purchase tubing and piping. There's varying levels of what you do, but adding the food sources and having something that keeps the water oxygenated constantly, no dead zones in there. You want robust moving around, and that'll help extract those awesome organisms in the compost into solution. It's an artificial environment, it being water or just water. So you want to keep the oxygen in there. But yeah, you can. There's a lot of things online. You can buy a big, 100-gallon brewer, but we are getting great results out of our 4 50-gallon homemade brewers. So I've got one at home that, is in my basement, not quite made yet, with the 2 young kids at home. I've hopefully this winter will be a project of mine, but yes, I do this professionally, so I have an understanding. But you know, there are some great books out there, great resources to kind of delve into what that is and what it entails.
And we can also maybe follow up with a blog post on that. We do have a pretty active blog that we, have different articles on. And I would say too, just starting with compost is another way to get, at least part of that result, because it's really that you're trying to get that biology into the soil, and then not apply anything that's going to kill that, which a lot of, like Anthony said earlier, kind of conventional fertilizers can hurt that biology because they're so salt heavy. Or it's just, it's like overload of nutrient. So I think, trying to cut back those inputs and build up, putting organic material on.
That's a really great point, Keelin, because ultimately, we have an artificial kind of, built environment here in the Greenway, but as a rule, our soils in New England are low in organic matter, with the way they were created. So if you can add actual compost to your soils, that can in turn be the best thing that you can do. You want to be building up those reserves for the organisms to thrive and grow on. So no, that's an awesome point. Thank you for that, Keelin.
Yeah. For Kathy, I have a question. Michelle is asking how to put her gardens to bed, and what could she do, this weekend for her tiny flower garden that uses some of the concepts we just talked about.
Yeah, that's a great question too. That's always a discussion point about how much to clean out your garden beds, every year. There's on one extreme, you leave everything just as it is and clean it up in the spring. And that's really great for gardeners like me who are lazy, but it's also really great for the ecology, because it turns out that all those microorganisms and the butterfly and bee larvae overwinter there, and the birds eat the seeds that are left behind. And so it's really great for the biology to leave everything in place for the winter, because otherwise you're scraping away all the insects and microbes that you're trying to feed all summer. So on the other hand, there's what you want to look at in the winter. And I mean, on the Greenway, for instance, it's a public park, so people expect a certain neatness. If you're can tolerate that kind of a little bit of messiness, I would just leave it. Otherwise, what I would do, if you want kind of in between, I would go through and cut down the flower stalks to maybe 12 inches high, take out the biggest of the leaves, but leave some of the smaller leaves, and make sure there's no bare soil. Yeah. If you have any bare soil left, cover it with mulch. But if you're leaving a lot of leaf litter, you don't need a lot of mulch. So that's your trade-off to do.
And a lot of times that leaf litter breaks right down into the compost.
Exactly. That's what it's for free mulch, right? Who can argue?
That's how Mother Nature fertilizes the planet. So plants fall down, break down, and in turn provide nutrients to the soil and the plants in the environment.
I have not pulled off the daylily foliage from my daylilies in years. I just let it kind of fall to the ground, and they kind of dissolve into the soil and decompose. Yep. By next spring, they're ready to go again.
Yep. Same thing with leaves and lawns. I mow even at my own house. My lawn at home does not look like the Greenway's lawns, but I mow my leaves right into it, and we do the same thing here. We don't take all the leaves off. Yes, if you've got a real thick layer, we'll kind of take some of that out, but yeah, we mow the leaves right into the lawn and help in turn fertilize that too. It's all part of the system.
Anthony, we got a couple of questions around sort of weather. So from Peg, has this year's drought impacted the care for the garden? And then maybe related from Josh, how does the change in the weather, how do different changes in the weather affect the microorganism activity in the soil?
Great, yes. Drought, yes, this year has been impactful for a variety of reasons. With things COVID, we're a bit short-staffed this year, so utilizing our irrigation systems and watering appropriately. Very careful not to use too much water, because if you're using a lot of just extra water, your root systems aren't going to grow deep. They're not going to be more resilient to drought. So that kind of plays into our lawns too. You want to water deeply and infrequently to draw those roots through the soil profile. So if your roots have this much water to go, this much soil to derive water and nutrients versus that much, they're going to be able to withstand the conditions. So creating a healthy root system for these plants to naturally take up water that is built up in the soil profile, as well as building up the organic matter, creating a good soil structure. Those will all help retain water in the soil. As far as Josh's question on soil biology, kind of as a rule, biology kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year. With the hot summer conditions, the biology goes a little more dormant in the summertime, as do our plants. Turf grasses go naturally dormant in the summertime up in our areas, unless you're keeping them watered and everything like we do here. But yeah, it ebbs and flows throughout the year. We'll monitor it. It'll be interesting to see what happens when we get our soil test back from the soil food web, to see how our biological levels are doing. One other thing we haven't been able to do as much as we'd want to, but we do have some microscopes and stuff, and I would love to, as we move forward throughout the years, be able to employ them more. So we can actually look at our soils and the conditions under a microscope and see real time what the biology is doing. That's kind of the next step that I'd like to take our program in, is doing real, live analyses of what's going on.
And I think that Tori said this, but the times that we're applying the compost tea are definitely the spring and the fall, when it's not the hot summer, because that soil temperature is then too hot to really help those newly born microorganisms get used to their soil home.
You think about it, they're alive organisms. I mean, I don't tend to like the 95-degree heat myself. If you're spraying those out in the lawn when it's hot and sunny, they're photosensitive and they won't get into the soil profile. They'll die before they're really effective. So between going dormant, conditions, both water, rainfall, and climatic temperature conditions are more preferable to the biological life in the spring and the summertime. Spring and fall time.
And then maybe we're getting a little close to time. One quick question, Anthony. Where do you do the food web test? Because that's not UMass, correct?
Yep, that's correct. UMass does our chemical analyses. That test is fairly inexpensive. I think it's like $22 or $25 per test, and I always include organic matter content in there so I can see how that's doing. The biological test that we do, we send it to a company called Soil Food Web New York, and Paul Wagner out there, he analyzes all of those. When you're that kind of assessment, a little different than the live action assessment under a microscope, like if you were to do it in the park, but it's an excellent snapshot as to what the biology is doing. It's a more expensive test, so we tend to do a smattering throughout the Greenway in like areas. So we tend to send those, not as many as we would the UMass test. And try to get trends. So we send them to Soil Food Web New York. Paul Wagner's an awesome guy, and it's a wealth of information.
Great. Well, I am sad that we're out of time, but we're closing in on 2. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thanks everyone for joining us. We'll follow up on those questions, like I said, in blog posts, and you can definitely email us at info@. And you can also follow our social media accounts to learn more about our horticulture, everything else we have to offer. Today's program was part of a series of webinars we'll be doing this fall and spring. Next up, just next week, is a deeper dive of our current public art piece, Lantern Stories. And we'll also be adding some horticulture topics in the winter, so look out for those. And in general, it has been a crazy year. And in these challenging times, we're really remaining committed to providing a world-class public park. We're so grateful to our Greenway community, our board members, our staff, our volunteers, our donors. We are, as so many, preparing for some financial challenges ahead. Earned income makes up a huge part of our budget, about a third. That'll be lower by $1.25 million this year due to the lower rent from our food trucks, late openings on a lot of our carousel and beer gardens. We had to cancel our biggest fundraiser for the year. So since 80% of our budget does come from private sources, support for the Greenway is definitely needed this year. We really appreciate our family of supporters more than ever. And you can help the Greenway by making a donation or by joining our volunteer program and getting to experience it yourself, like Kathy. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone again for joining, and we hope to see you on the Greenway. Have a wonderful afternoon.